Hi, if you are watching this video, you probably reached a point in your language learning journey where you feel stuck, like you're not evolving, or at the very least, that the amount of effort you currently put into learning is not paying off as much as you expected it to. Second language acquisition is an interdisciplinary field. There are many theories that try to make sense of this process, describe it, explain it, but so far none can be said to be universally accepted as a complete explanation by all researchers. That is probably because no matter how close to reality our guesses about how all of it works are, we can never really know for sure something is an absolute truth, because everything we believe is true is limited, in the sense that we could always just stumble upon new discoveries. Who knows? Maybe in the future a crazy development in neuroscience could revolutionize how we approach a new language. But anyway, regardless of whether or not these existing theories are accurate or agreed upon, I think all of us who have been learning a language for a while, or at least me and the people who clicked on this video, can agree that at some point you feel like your progress just slows down to the point where you feel like you are no longer improving, no matter how much you try. This is usually referred to as the language learning plateau. This feeling of being stuck can actually just be a matter of perception, because when you start, everything you learn is, new, but after moving on from the foundations, you start to learn from things you already know, right? So you can just feel like you are not getting enough novelty. But that's just how it works, and you can't just expect the learning pace to always remain the same. The learning curve is a curve, and not a straight line upwards. Now, understanding and being aware of the fact that this stage of learning a new language is normal will not automatically make it not suck. Plus, a lot of things can contribute to this feeling of despair, and I believe one of those can be comparison. You may have tried to go online to look for tips or inspiration and came across some cool people who have managed to master a ton of languages. And while that can serve as a welcome reminder that, hey, this is possible, it may also end up adding to your frustration. You may start comparing your progress to other people's and believing you are very behind somehow, and you start to feel some embarrassment from it. And suddenly, this journey, that should feel fun and full of small little victories, is riddled with guilt. If you start to think of it as a competition or a chore rather than a genuine interest of yours, you will breed these negative feelings. No one likes to feel like they are bad at something. Always remember that your language learning journey, and consequently the time it takes for you to get where you want to be, will be influenced by multiple factors, like the language or languages you already speak, your age, and even seemingly unrelated social factors like your health or socioeconomic status. Basically, any of your personal circumstances is going to differentiate your experience from other people's in some way. Also, these people you see giving out advice are usually already success stories. They are meant to remind you that you can get through this stage, but you should also keep in mind that there are many people in the same boat as you that you're not seeing. For example, I've been learning Mandarin Chinese for almost 5 years now. Of course, over the years, I have not always kept the same exact habits or devoted the same amount of time throughout, but yeah, it's been a few years, and I'd say I am still fighting my way into an advanced level. I've even had the opportunity to live in China for a semester, and although the constant input helped me develop my listening skills in a short amount of time, I definitely was not conversing fluently in my day-to-day interactions. One thing that can really hold us back from attempting to speak a new language with someone else and really take that next step toward fluency is the fear of making a complete fool of ourselves. I get it, but would you make fun of someone or make someone feel bad if they tried to communicate with you? No, right? Because that would kind of make you a bit of an asshole. But really, speaking from experience, I can tell you that in most cases, the worst thing that can happen is a temporary confusion before you find some other way to express what you want to say. I am really grateful for some of the teachers I've had who really encourage us to just try and express ourselves in class despite our limitations. But I'm aware that these specific conditions are not accessible to everyone, so sometimes we just have to get a little creative with our sources of input and output. I will get to that. Above all, we have to keep in mind the reasons behind our decision to start this process, what we want out of it. Maybe you're like me and your curiosity makes you want to be able to communicate with and learn from new people, or you think this could help you be more competitive in the job market, or maybe there are people in your family you would like to connect with in their native language that you didn't get the chance to learn as a child, or perhaps you have some other reason. This is your main goal and motivation, And just to maintain that satisfying feeling of achievement throughout, you can work towards that goal with smaller, realistic goals as you go along, a bit tailored to your specific purpose. Fluency describes the ability to talk about a broad amount of subjects comfortably, but obviously, if you're looking to have casual, everyday conversations with friends, you probably don't need to know how to say paperclip just now. If you're studying to pass a specific exam, there should be vocabulary lists out there to serve as guidelines for your progress. But anyway, my advice is to keep it light and fun. Regardless of how this plateau feels, you are still moving towards your goal, and it should feel like a really cool thing you're doing, working on yourself, rather than feeling bad because of a self-imposed timer on your progress. I have seen this motivational phrase going around for people who are kind of hesitant to start something new because it might take too long to accomplish, which is, the time will pass anyway. If this is something you want to do, it really doesn't have to matter how long it takes. But also, if it stops being enjoyable for you, by all means, take breaks or reconsider how important it is to you. Go over pros and cons. It is your life and you've only got one. So no matter how cool it is to gain new skills, the hassle to get there should not be surpassing the end reward. And back to what I was saying about being subjected to success stories all the time, I actually quit Korean after a few months of learning it. I actually really enjoy the language, and I do plan on getting back to it at some point, but at that stage in my life, I was overwhelmed by other things, and it just wasn't worth it at the time. Like I said, I plan to get back to it, but if I don't end up doing it, I'm sure it will be because I spent my time doing a bunch of other things that in some way or another fulfilled me. I don't do well with strict schedules. I rely a lot on my mood to figure out what I want to do with my time. But of course, discipline and accountability are essential when it comes to this process. I maintain consistency mostly because of my mindset towards Mandarin Chinese. I always try to keep a positive outlook on my good and bad days. I recognize that it is not going to be easy 100% of the time, and there needs to be a balance between effortless input and learning with intention. Firstly, I diversify my sources. To relax, I enjoy watching YouTube videos and TV shows and listening to music, and I can incorporate my target language into all of these hobbies. If I feel fine and energized, I might spend some energy into testing myself a little bit by listening more closely and see what I can understand without translation. But if I feel tired and have no motivation, I tranquilize myself by thinking that at least passively listening to my target language is still better than not engaging with it at all. Forcing yourself when you don't have the mental capacity to fully focus will not yield the best results anyway. I have to believe that when I do feel more capable, I will sit down and honor my commitment to the extent that I can. Graded learning materials can be a great option because they should be made up of mostly words that you already know, but also have just enough words you don't to introduce new vocabulary and keep you feeling challenged. There's also bilingual book editions that allow you to quickly look back and forth between languages. Again, for me, the way I read these will depend on my mental state, so I can either go for my target language and check words and expressions I don't understand, or I can just have fun reading the book in the language I understand and check my target language's side when I come across words that I find interesting or helpful to know. My process for studying a text is usually to patiently sit down to read it and try to understand new words as best I can from context clues before looking it up. The ability to use these clues is essential because during real-life conversations, you will rely a lot on extrapolating meaning when you're not so sure what every single individual word means. After reading and having an understanding of the content, I will write it all down to practice my handwriting. Because I'm mostly trying to build some muscle memory and it can be sort of a boring activity, I usually put on some music for this part. But still, as I do this, I try to be conscious of the most common sentence structures so I can internalize them and with time, reproduce them very naturally in my output. And speaking of output, it is massively important to produce language. But if you don't have access to formal education, you might have trouble with that since you don't have anyone to correct your mistakes. In this case, tools like ChatGPT could help you, but you need to be aware that it does not fact check or verify information, so it can be inaccurate. For human feedback on your output, you can find native speakers of your target language who are currently learning your native language and develop a mutually beneficial relationship. But keep in mind, you have to be willing to put effort into helping them as well. For my essays, I used to make a rough draft and then try to translate it as best as I could. To make it as natural as possible, I'd look up example sentences with the vocabulary I wanted to use to have an idea of how a native speaker would incorporate that word in a sentence, like how they'd more commonly phrase things. But nowadays, I am focusing on directly producing sentences in my target language and eliminating this translation phase, because I find that sticking to your native language's patterns can limit you. Not every expression as an equivalent in another language, and trying to directly produce in your target language will help you find your limitations much quicker, and you can then work on those to improve. Sometimes I'll try to think in my target language, and if I'm too lazy to look them up at the moment, I'll replace the words I don't know with my language and move on. But more often than not, I actually get curious because the feeling of not knowing kind of nags at me, and I end up learning about a lot of random things this way. A lot of people switch to writing their diary in their target language, since obviously it helps with acquiring really useful day-to-day vocabulary. I don't really keep one, but that could work for you. That's kind of it for this video. I'm sure you've already seen all kinds of tips for learning before, but hopefully this has helped you gain a more positive outlook and keep afloat during this intermediate stage. Thank you for watching.